CR101radio.com, podcasts, and more.
15. Reality, Faith, and Architecture. Chalcedon Position Paper, number 116, December 1989. What a man truly believes will affect every area of his life and thought. Whatever his outward profession of faith, his life will reveal what governs his heart. Outside of Christ, the motive in the lives of men is the will to be one's own God, to determine what constitutes good and evil, law and morality, and all things else. The more power a man has, the more openly his life will reveal his heart, his basic faith. Kings and rulers over the centuries have, like master criminals, been more free in expressing their motivating faith than most men, simply because their power gives them the freedom to be themselves. Over the centuries, architecture has been especially revelatory of men and cultures because architecture gives solid expression to a lifestyle. Not surprisingly, some have seen architecture as the central art and as the most important one in understanding an era's ideas and hopes. Two key architectural areas of expression from antiquity to the present have been temples, places where the gods dwell, houses of worship, places for sacrifices, etc., and palaces, residence of kings, emperors, rulers of various sorts, parliaments, people's palaces, or bureaucratic centres, and so on. The palace is an imitation temple, the house where divine rulers dwell, or where the voice of the people as the voice of God comes into focus. The modern temple, thus, is a state building. All over the world, state buildings are now the, quote, marble palaces, end quote, and temples of modern man who sees salvation as political action. It is of interest that in the earliest church buildings of the Christian era, the construction was of stone, the sanctuary was a throne room of Christ the King, and the congregation stood when the King's word, the Bible, was read. Christians saw the kingdom of God as the only true empire, and thus they challenged Rome's claim to sovereignty. As humanism began to develop in the late medieval era, the construction of churches and cathedrals began to be rivaled by the residences of kings, lords, bankers, the Medici, and other men of power. The doctrine of the divine right of kings had its architectural expression in magnificent palaces, most notably Versailles, which was built not for comfort, but as an expression of power and divine right. Portraits of Louis XIV echo the representations of Zeus, head of the Greek pantheon of gods, and lesser gods of France. The nobility constituted the court. Grandeur in architecture became the evidence of success and social ascent. Chairs at the dining table became so ornate and ponderous that they were an effort for a man to move. Rooms could be draughty and very, very cold, but the impression of divine grandeur, unlimited wealth and power, and overwhelming majesty were more important in these temples of godlike men. It is hard at this distance to sense the Puritan hostility to all these pretensions. While the Puritans themselves did not abandon expensive and attractive clothing, others, like the Quakers and the other Anabaptists, the Mennonites, the Amish, etc., insisted on plainness and simplicity as a religious matter. In the American colonies, this new perspective found its freest expression. As some grew wealthy, larger homes became more common, but their premise was a different one than had previously governed Europeans. We can call it a difference between imagination and reality. The palace standard catered to man's imagination of himself as a god, a lord over his domains, a man who could be lord over all he surveyed. The reality standard saw a house as a tool for living, not an eternal monument. Both wood and stone were readily available in the colonies, but men routinely chose wood. Houses were built not to dominate their setting, but to fit into it. As a result, the house and street were located, as were barns and all outbuildings, so that they might best utilize the prevailing winds and the arc of the sun. A good house leaks air. An airtight house is not a healthy place to live. When best placed, a house's air supply will be twice replaced in a day without any draught or discomfort and with great health advantages. Fireplaces were similarly designed to avoid problems due to winds. The roof was slanted steepest toward the winter winds, and the rooms most used faced the south. Especially in New England and the Middle Atlantic colonies, the engineering of houses became a remarkable American science and art. Eric Sloane, in his various delightful books, has given us a detailed picture of the many accomplishments of that era. Palaces were not the objective. The devout Puritan temper created a type of housing to be a tool for living, to circulate fresh air in the summer, and to conserve heat in the winter. Because the family was seen as God's basic social unit, the house was also designed to be a home, not a palace. The English word home comes from an ancient Teutonic word which may mean to lie down. In the colonial world, it developed two very different meanings. Outside of the American colonies, home meant, of generations, England, and going home meant returning to England. In the American colonies other than Canada, it quickly came to mean one's house and family, and it carried a meaning of serenity and peace. It was an American who much later wrote, "Home Sweet Home." Now damned by modern Americans as sentimental, it tellingly contrasted the American home to palaces. The song is now in disfavour because Americans have abandoned the home idea for a miniature palace. Furniture advertisement pictures, showroom windows, and interior decorators now set the standard. The goal is a miniature palace for the masses. A small house of 1,500 square feet is often designed to convey a sense of grandeur. People want to make the right impression. The house has ceased to express the faith and family history of its dwellers. It is usually stripped of all religious items. Family pictures, portraits of parents and grandparents, and family mementos are not there. The American house is only occasionally a home. It is an impersonal atmosphere. Some years ago, a prominent ex-prostitute, ex-madam, Polly Adler, wrote her memoirs entitled, "A House is Not a Home." Well, a brothel indeed can be in a house, but it is not a home. Similarly, a family can live in a house which is not a home when its centre is not the Christian faith, but a standard of living. Houses now have a poor sense of reality because their owners lack one. Because living is now associated with neither faith, family, nor work, the focus of the house is on pleasure. The family wants to live, that is, experience the maximum pleasures of living it can afford, and hence the house is built to cater to the pleasure principle. Eric Sloane said, "The early American home and farm were one in much more than a casual commentary on colonial life. It was the pioneer's creed and a basic American belief until a century ago." American Yesterday, page 39. Moreover, the average home of a century ago had twice as many rooms, most of which are now obsolete and forgotten, as are in the complete house of today. The smoke rooms, food cellar, bourning room, milk room, chapel room, keeping room, summer kitchen, washroom, and a corn room are just a few of the rooms that were as standard to an old house as a coat closet is to a modern one. Page 47. Because of their size, the houses have tended to disappear. Ironically, in the surviving ones, the chapel room becomes a large closet. The chapel room was usually located near the front door. By the latter part of the 1800s, the reality standard which had governed the American outlook was gone. A pomposity of manner and style had replaced it. The gift for simplicity which had marked colonial and early America had given way, first to ornateness, and then to the pseudo-simplicity in this century of Frank Lloyd Wright and others. Architecture is a reflection of faith and life, and, given the instability and inconstancy of the modern mood, the architectural goal has too often been novelty and impression, making a statement. When men profess Christ, but live outside of Christ, there is then no sphere of life or thoughts which they can govern because they cannot govern themselves. Living in terms of the pleasure principle, to use Freud's terms, means disregarding the reality principle. If pleasure is our goal, we are saying that we are little gods who must be pleased. The world is out of joint if we are not happy. If we live in terms of Jesus Christ as Lord, then, whether we are rich or poor, happy or unhappy, fulfilled or unfulfilled is of no consequence. The question is, are we faithful to Him and serving Him?